They don't respect the view that a constitution is higher than other laws.
Welcome to this edition of Free Talk, program brought to you proudly in partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation and Heart and Soul TV and Radio. And I am your host, Dara Blessed Mhlanga. And this week we are going to be discussing an emotive issue for many across the divide, the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, which has now become the Constitutional Amendment Act after it was signed into law by President Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. But we're going to be focusing and zeroing in especially on the political actors' dialogue. Is it just a mere talk show? Is it just a place where people just sit and talk? Connecting it to the dots, to this amendment bill, because as you are aware, POLAD had strong reservations against this amendment. And they, in their agreement and discussion, had asked government to stop this omnibus amendment of the Constitution, 26 amendments, by the way. And government, led by Zanu PF, clearly defied this. So to discuss this in studio, I'm joined by Professor Lovemore Maduku, who heads the POLAD subcommittee that looks at the law, and also he is the president of the National Constitutional Assembly. Welcome, Professor, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes. Professor, let us just start to answering the question, is POLAD a serious platform for dialogue, or is it just a talk show?
Yes, POLAD is a very serious platform for dialogue, in the sense that dialogue, as we understand it, is the exchange of views. It is a process where you put across what you believe in, you engage with the other person's views, they also put across what they believe in. Sometimes you reach agreements, sometimes you don't reach agreements, but dialogue in itself is a useful framework for ensuring that decisions that are ultimately made are informed by the debate that would be taking place. But so within POLAD, that is.
But the people you're talking to are not listening to you. So does that become a dialogue, or it's just a talk show?
Well, I mean, that is a very unfair sort of conclusion. We have had the POLAD platform. We have not only discussed the Constitution amendment process. POLAD has also been discussing issues to do with economic frameworks, national hearing, and so on. On this particular issue that you introduced, well, yes, it can be correct that what the POLAD position was has not succeeded in that particular position. But we still have a long way to go with so many other issues on the agenda. And we know, and we've always made it clear, that POLAD is not the government. It does dialogue with the government. It does provide a platform for us to interact with the government. On this one, I can say for myself, it failed to make government withdraw or delay or ensure that the constitutional amendment process will incorporate other things. That's what was discussed. That has not succeeded for now. And so, but for me and for many people in POLAD, we don't believe that that means that POLAD is ineffective.
Before we zero in on the constitutional amendment, you said that there are a whole lot of other things that you have discussed. Now, excite me with what you have achieved.
Well, I think that the basic achievement of POLAD has been to ensure that government knows that there are other stakeholders outside itself, that government respects other stakeholders outside itself, that when it wants to implement anything, it must also take into account what has been said by others. Now, the whole business of the foreign currency stabilization mechanisms have had a lot of input from the POLAD discussions. In fact, it started with our economic subcommittee. That economic subcommittee did organize an economic summit, which was held at the Rainbow Towers. If you will recall, most of the recommendations coming out of the summit, we produced a report. Those have been taken over. We actually had a meeting with the Minister of Finance and the Reserve Bank Governor. So I would not say that POLAD is telling government what to do, but a number of points raised by POLAD were taken into account.
Now, are you when you speak about the economic stabilization and stuff like that? You work for government. You're paid your government. Are you sitting there so certain that the economy has stabilized to the point that a government employee can enjoy the benefits of this economy?
Not yet, not yet. I think when I say economic stabilization, I'm not saying that the economy has already stabilized. I'm saying that we are contributing to the efforts to stabilize the economy. The success of those processes will really depend on the implementation. And of course, you must not forget that the government we have is a Zanu PF government. So I'm not here to guarantee that the Zanu PF government will succeed. I'm here to guarantee that inputs coming from people will be taken into account. And that is the culture that we want to build. They obviously, as a government, like what has happened now, take into account certain things and throw away other things. But that's a new way of governance, which is important, which is to ensure that when you are elected and you win elections, you don't just sit there and say, my ideas and my ideas alone will work. That is not the attitude. The attitude is that I've won an election, but there are also others outside me who would want to contribute.
But do you think without that input, Mthuli as the finance minister would not have managed to do these things that they're doing? The auction system, the rigging of the currency on the official market.
Well, I'm sure those are the views that you choose to express. You see, you need to understand that a democracy that we are trying to ensure we get in this country is not a place where you guarantee that the views of each and every person would find their day at the implementation table. That's not it. The democracy is good in itself and a success in itself if there is a culture where we consult each other, where we talk, where we respect the dignity of other people. So that's what we want to do. Then in an election, every 5 years we'll go to an election. Zimbabweans will now get to realize that we ought to elect people that will be able to produce the results. What we are doing in POLAD, what we are doing with the Second Republic, we're actually preparing the Second Republic to leave office. That's for me and others in POLAD. I mean, look at the culture that they are building. It's not a small culture. It's a very important culture. Any next president must know that there is an opposition. That in itself is very important. It was not like, I mean,
Professor, do you think someone who's preparing to leave office would do the amendments that have been done? Give me the powers to appoint the judges single-handedly. Give me the powers not to be scrutinized by Parliament when I borrow money from outside the country with private players. Is this a republic that's preparing to leave office to you?
No, don't miss the point. When I say we, the president and his party, I'm sure they want to entrench themselves and ensure that they remain in office.
And are they doing it?
We will ensure that that doesn't happen at the pace that they are taking. We, which is other players, we are in POLAD, there are other political parties out there. We want to create a platform where those in government can easily leave office when the people decide them to leave. That's what I meant by saying we are preparing. We are very much in support of the culture that has been introduced of a POLAD, a platform of political actors exchanging views. And POLAD is not a platform to replace the government. That's where you need to. So I would want POLAD for the rest of the life of this country. So any leader who wins an election must know that there are other players and they bring them about. So we go to 2023, assume that I win the election, someone else wins the election. We would want that president to continue with the POLAD. That's what I mean. And that, remember, we are starting with this kind of initiative. It will take time. Zimbabweans, I'm sure they will learn with time and appreciate what we are doing. They actually want results every day. I mean, I can appreciate where we are coming from. So you're in POLAD, so what have you achieved? Well, they would need some patience to realize that it is the culture of talking, the culture of dialogue that POLAD is all about.
Some have said that people have turned POLAD into a feeding trough where number of opposition leaders who have not known staying in hotels have had an opportunity to stay in hotels, to fly to Victoria Falls just to get a COVID vaccination, and allowances intended across, that comes with it. And this is why even when you are disrespected, your views are not listened to, you still find space to say POLAD is the right place.
I think that is a wrong way of looking at it. The people in POLAD, like anyone else, when they come to meetings, they obviously have to be sitting somewhere. There ought to be some chair there, there ought to be a conference room. If they have to travel, there ought to be some transport to go wherever they have to go. And so the vaccination in Vic Falls, I mean, it had been organized that the president would launch, that second phase of the vaccination program in Vic Falls. And clearly they had to travel to go to Vic Falls. Not everyone flew to Vic Falls. Those that flew to Vic Falls were coming from Harare. But there are many POLAD leaders near Vic Falls or in areas from Bulawayo, for example, who did not fly to Vic Falls. They drove there. So the focus must not be on what the leaders are doing. It's not a feeding thing.
But they flew to Chimanimani to look at the at Cyclone Idai devastation. They've been staying in Rainbow Towers. In fact, we saw a video. I think you saw it, that went viral on social media, of one POLAD leader who was filming from I don't know which floor of the Rainbow Towers, and so excited that and saying and stuff like that.
Well, I would prefer to use different words. They traveled to Chimanimani. They traveled to Vic Falls. The mode of transport surely is not an issue. And then if they have to spend a day or a night in Harare, if they are coming from outside Harare, surely they will have to spend a night here. I think the focus must not be on hotels or on air travel. It must simply be on people that are doing their work. And as human beings, they are supposed to be catered for by human needs, which is not the focus. There will have to be some small expense for getting people to meet and to be doing their day-to-day work. I wouldn't think that the majority of the people will complain about that.
But some actually wanted diplomatic passport. Some had sat down. I remember there was a leak, and you also spoke strongly against the desires that were being expressed by some people in POLAD. They wanted diplomatic passports. They wanted to travel to the US and stuff like that. And people were already appointing spokespersons to get financial benefit. Now, these things are the things that then Zimbabweans look at and say, our leaders or those leaders of the opposition are more interested in the politics of the stomach.
I think that would be a wrong position. We know that there are leaders in parliament, for example, so our MPs would have to get the normal whatever allowances and so on. We have leaders in councils, the councillors must do that. We have leaders in cabinet, the ministers and so on. They have to get that. Now the platform that has been created, the POLAD platform, is actually a leadership platform, although not in the formalized structure of the state. But it's a very useful platform for ensuring that our politics is made right. And making our politics right is to ensure that we emphasize a culture of dialogue. And for that, I'm sure society simply has to accept that there will be a few expenses associated with either traveling, accommodation, and so forth. So I don't think that that is a proper way of focusing on it. When the initial thing of going to the United States was actually to go and lobby for the lifting of sanctions and restrictive measures. And that trip has not yet been undertaken. But I'm sure when an opportunity arises, there will be people that will be going.
But isn't it that the problem, Professor Madu? That we know what needs to be done for the sanctions to be lifted, and it's not flying to the United States.
I know that there are so many issues around sanctions, and I think it's not as simple as saying we do this and the sanctions will be lifted. There would need to be a lot of engagement and re-engagements, and most of the people that have imposed these sanctions don't simply wake up overnight and say we are changing that because of it. It takes some time for them to be able to do that. So that engagement would have been a very necessary step.
But look at it this way, Professor. Just recently the EU, the European Union, said that the type of laws, especially following the amendment of the Constitution, does not bring confidence in re-engagement. And we had a headline just, I think this morning, where the EU has warned Zimbabwean government against imposing such laws and going the direction it is going. So do you think flying there or any talks with POLAD can change anything in this scenario?
Well, I should make it clear that I do not agree with the amendments. The NCA does not agree with the amendments. That position has always been clear. We have a very clear position on the Constitution. But I would not agree with you that if we pass an unjust law, or a law that some people think is really going too far and trying to entrench the powers of the president, then there ought to be sanctions against us. I think that is not the way to do it. Every country would have its own problems. In every country, if you go to the statute books of any country in the world, you will be able to tick those laws that you say are good and laws that you say are bad or really undemocratic. But you don't say that for every piece of undemocratic law there ought to be a sanction or there ought to be sanctions put by. I think that's not the way to go. We accept that the laws are unacceptable, but we have to keep engaging. We should not punish Zimbabweans for the behavior of Zanu PF or the excesses of Zanu PF. That is the very point which those who wanted to travel to the various capitals in Europe or in the United States wanted to make, and coming from an opposition platform. Certainly I would be one of the persons that would want to make that point, that no matter how much suffering I'll get under ED, allow me an opportunity to fight him within the Zimbabwean setting, but do not impose sanctions on the country. That is the point.
Do you think without any foreign force or exertion of power, Zanu PF is capable of transforming itself to the point that you're talking about, preparing to leave power?
The Zanu PF need not be transformed. We don't need to transform Zanu. Zanu PF needs to be engaged. We need to expose what Zanu does to the people. We need to raise the consciousness of people. Zanu PF must be voted out of power. So we don't have to. Why should we invest in transforming such a movement? They are a political party. They want to remain in power. When I say preparing them out, we are saying, look, we want to gain from the culture that there is. Before long, they will not have known what.
Do you think it's possible to vote them out of power?
Very much possible.
How?
I mean, wait for 2023 and see what people will do. The way to get ZANU out is to raise the consciousness of Zimbabweans, to see where ZANU PF is getting wrong. And this discussion we started earlier on, we managed as POLAD to show that ZANU PF does get access to alternative views. Everyone knows that ZANU PF was advised by its own colleagues in POLAD to withdraw the bill, to stop the bill, I mean, to ensure that there are other inputs. Everyone saw that. Then Zanu PF went ahead. Instead of blaming POLAD for saying you were not listened to, people must see that, look, these people were advised, but they did not listen. But they must punish Zanu.
But they had support from the MDCT. It voted with them.
Well, I think that I have followed what was happening. The MDCT was not supporting Zanu PF necessarily. They were supporting their own views. I think you interviewed some of them, or I saw at least, but I'm aware of what their president said, Douglas Mwonzora. What he said is, well, in their reasoning, they thought that there were some things in the bill that outweighed the negative.
Does it make sense to you?
I'm not supposed to comment on that. They're a political party. I am a political party.
Yes, but you are also contesting for power, so it's fair to criticize a political party.
Look, from now, it would not even, I wouldn't waste time criticizing the MDCT. Our focus on Zanu.
Is it because you are conflicted because you represent them?
I think you've answered well. I mean, I cannot appear on this program. I'm their lawyer, and then whatever they're doing, for now, I would not do that. But also, even getting outside that framework, surely we must focus more on criticizing Zanu PF.
Now, let us look at the amendment itself. Does it advance democracy in Zimbabwe?
Very good question, Blessed. The current constitution does not advance democracy in Zimbabwe. The current constitution. Which is why I am proud to say that I campaigned against it. The NCA campaigned against that constitution. We got 5.5% voting no, and the rest went. The current constitution is an undemocratic constitution in the sense that it concentrates power in the hands of the president. Now, ED finds that power not enough. And so he is consolidating more. But his additional consolidation doesn't really materially change a constitution that is itself inherently undemocratic. That's the clarification I want to make. So we get people having all this outcry about, no, he wants to appoint judges, he wants to remove the running mate. Those are simply additional to the powers that, even without the power that he has given himself expressly, that he would say certain judges, no interviews. But even with the interviews, who would want to tell me that there are judges that really came out so independent without ED input or former President Mugabe's and so. So the interviewing process itself had inherent weaknesses. Remember that you'd give the president 3 names. And out of those 3 names, you'd pick one. If he's not happy with the 3, he throws them back. When they appointed the Prosecutor General, I'm sure you're aware that they had 3 names. The president was unhappy with 3 names and asked them to send additional names. He had the power, and what he did was lawful. Then he ended up picking the current Prosecutor General, who had been placed 6th by the Judicial Service Commission. Legally, that was fine. Legally, it was in terms of the Constitution. But the president was acting constitutional. What kind of a constitution is that gives a president such much power? Look at the issue that the running mate clause.
But don't you think that having this information and knowing all this information that the president actually went to pick number 6 actually works for the public, because the public, at least they know these things. In this instance, with the amendment right now, it's not even obliged to do any of that.
Well, those are... You see, why do you make a constitution which says at least we know that he will pick number 6? That's where the problem is. I mean, Zimbabweans must revisit the constitution.
But without those clauses, don't you think, like, for instance, Justice Chiweshe could have been the Chief Justice by today, because he wanted that job, and because of the public interviews, he withdrew. And it became difficult to justify his appointment in that job.
But I mean, that the problem you are facing there is that you already think that Justice Chiweshe would not have been Chief Justice, or that he's not competent to be Chief Justice. There will not be an agreement on that. The point that we are making is that you must not have interviews and then you leave it to the president to determine who among the interviews is the appointed person. Remember that interviews are picked from other jurisdictions, where after the interview, the Americans start with the nomination, and then the person must pass a Senate interview, and that's the end of the matter. The person gets on, and so on. In the South African setting, outside the Chief Justice and a few judges of the Constitutional Court, The president must appoint on the recommendations of the Judicial Service Commission. Those recommendations are made public before they are sent to the president. Here we actually don't know which names have been sent to the president. Now this idea that he was number 6, these are the things that we pick from the media. I think it was your papers that told us that. It was the Independent and so forth. But look, the point I'm making, Blessed, and I think that Zimbabweans must appreciate that point, is we are not happy with the continuation of the amendment. But we must not cheat ourselves to believe that it is the continuation of the amendment that is making our constitution bad. Our constitution is bad right from the start, and we must now politically look at the issue of having a new constitution. So we must fight a political battle. We must condemn Zanu PF for its behavior, and we see it every day. If you listen to the Minister of Justice, Zimbabwe, he doesn't see anything wrong with what he's doing. So he comes out of a philosophy, a political philosophy, where he believes that being the most popular party at any one time guarantees, tampering with the constitution. I mean, you listen to what he's been saying. You follow his speeches in Parliament, outside Parliament, interviews with the media. That's a very dangerous approach. But he is reflecting what Zanu PF thinks. And he is also reflecting what other Zimbabweans think. You talked about the MDCT. I'm not here, that I can criticize. The MDCT was part of the constitution making process, COPAC. President Mwonzora was the COPAC co-chairperson. And I was not surprised that Mwonzora and his group and his party will certainly find it useful to get to Parliament, sit there and say what is best for us or in our thinking. That's what they did. And what is best in our thinking as a party is to vote for this amendment to pass. So they would be very comfortable with such an approach because of day one, which is to make a constitution through politicians. This is where I have problems with. So I would say that the constitutional amendment process, it's a consolidation of power, yes, but it's a consolidation upon a consolidation. And a consolidation that is upon a consolidation is not as a consolidation that is coming from day one and so on. Zanu PF does not want a people-driven constitution making process, which is, they've always been clear on that point. What the Second Republic did under ED is to try to change the rhetoric on the constitution. Pretended one time that they would open up and be democratic. But look at how they did this thing. I've never come across an amendment or a constitutional amendment that is signed by the president within 2 days or a day. I even doubt whether he read that document when he signed it. So it is clearly someone who says, look, we have our agenda by a particular date. We must have our constitution signed, done with. So I think if I have any contribution, and I'm sure it's clear from your questions that this portion of the discussion really is about me, Love Momaduk, it's about the NCA, the party. It may not, and I think it doesn't reflect what some of my colleagues in POLAD think. This issue, that the constitution itself is inherently undemocratic. And the agenda in Zimbabwe is to revisit the politics of a constitution.
But you speak about Zanu PF doing certain things in a brazen and crass manner, but you still believe in talking to them. It's an abyss to me.
Yeah, I think that's where people must understand my politics and understand the NCA politics and understand the politics of the others. Even if Zanu PF were to do worse things than what you have already been describing, we'll still talk to them.
Why?
They are in government. They are the authority in government.
Mm-hmm. But you never spoke to Mugabe.
He didn't.
He was the president. He was in government.
He never created an opportunity. He never created an opportunity for us to have any dialogue with him. Never. Now, you have these people. If you are in any society and you have a government in place, whether that government you think is legitimate or illegitimate, lawfully or unlawfully in place, governance is about the exercise of power. And if they exercise power over you, and you are given an opportunity to still say, look, as you exercise this power over us, here are our thoughts.
Professor Maduk, at what point do you sit down and say, you know what, this is enough? Because you sat there and agreed in sharehood that this constitutional amendment bills should not go through. You sat there and you had an agreement with the president of this country, and he agreed with you. The following day, you put it through. I then spoke to you at that particular time, and you said, no, we understand that this thing is going to be withdrawn. The following day, I spoke to Paul Mangwana, who's also part of POLAD, and he told me that this thing is going to go through, come hell, come thunder. And that's what has happened. You're not being taken seriously, and you're still there. Why?
Well, I think that it's not correct that they're not taking us seriously. What I would say is that they did not agree with us on the Constitution.
So if they don't agree with you, they don't listen to you.
Well, I mean, that's one item. I have said that.
So what dialogue is that?
Well, I mean, you shouldn't reduce dialogue to one item. You cannot reduce the dialogue to just the constitution-making process. We accept that over the constitution-making process, government, because they are government, they decided not to agree with us, and they went ahead. But that.
But isn't this the crux of a nation, a constitution?
A constitution is the crux of the nation, but the dialogue process goes beyond that. The dialogue process is about so many other issues.
So if you violate the crux, what are you talking about?
Well, I mean, that will not stop the dialogue process continuing. And I think that if you give me an opportunity, I want to emphasize that point. I see your questioning. The feeling seems to be that if you are disregarded over the constitution-making process, you are disregarded over amendment number 2, then please leave POLAD. There's nothing. We disagree, and we sincerely believe that as we are in the POLAD process, there are so many things that we will not win, but there are others that we will win. And for those other things that we will win, I think that's worth it.
Let's name the things that we are going to win so that we can check with you.
Thank you for that thing. We are going now to be going to the electoral amendment processes. We now realize, I'm speaking for myself and the NCA, we now realize that Zanu PF on the Constitution, we are really worlds apart. So there will be no more utilization of the POLAD platform for the constitution making process. Not at all. We will be going to the public there to say, look, in POLAD, we tried to use the POLAD platform to ensure that there is some understanding on the part of Zanu PF on how a constitution must be dealt with. We failed. We'll say that. And then, but we are still there to look at how we can come up with electoral amendments. We already tabled the electoral amendments, and I think that we are having a meeting sometime at the end of May or early June, where we will be looking at the tabling of the amendments. So many of the amendments, but some of the amendments now will have to fall apart because they required a constitution amendment. Remember at one time I told you, I think it was in Zimbabwe when we were attending President Mugabe's burial, that we were going to be pushing for, amendment of the constitution to ensure that the president does not single-handedly appoint the chairperson of ZEC and so forth. That was our feeling, and it remains our feeling as a party. I still think that is the way to go. But we will not be wasting time on that because that requires an amendment of the constitution. It means Zanu PF has disagreed. We go to the other things. There are so many things that have to be attended to. I am very confident that we'll win. I can make one measurement. The nomination process of candidates and so on has been fairly difficult for many political parties. We are hoping that we will achieve a process that will liberalize the process of nomination of candidates, that any Zimbabwean who wants to stand in an election will be able to do so. I'm referring to council elections, MP elections and so forth. We will be looking at those. We're going to be looking at access to the public media. That requires some amendment of the electoral law and the Broadcasting Services Act and the ZBC provisions and so on. All these things, we're still hopeful that by the time we reach 2023, we'll be able to have a conversation like this on a public media. And that must be done, not like what happened in 2018, where they would ask you, I think we do just one slot for a candidate or one slot for a party. The ZBC would want to then edit, those kind of things and so on. We are going to be moving for an amendment to the various laws to ensure that there is more free time for all. I can give you one example. You'll be shocked to realize that the ZBC never aired or announced the presidential candidates. I mean, look at that very simple thing. There is a nomination. Here is the sample ballot. Here are the candidates. And you put it on television and say, that first candidate is so-and-so for this party. And you keep announcing, let's say once a day. I'm sure you are following that. Once a day, national media, or in the remaining 3 weeks, tell the public who are your candidates. They never did that in the last election. We are working on ensuring that we amend the laws to actually insist on the public being more informed about, the election campaign process. Then we have, the other one is the announcement of the election results. At the last election, we actually got the August 1 issue, people complaining and so on. We want election results now to be announced and made public at the polling station without any change. So you will be going with your media and other people. This is Mount Pleasant High School polling station. The presiding officer must announce the results of the presidential election publicly, so that when you are at home, you can now start putting that in your notebook. Not this nonsense about collation, once the results are signed for, they must not be changed anywhere else. We count results.
Do you think they have been changed in the past?
Well, there's a perception that when the result moves from the polling station to the ward collation center, to the constituents.
No, but you being a candidate.
Well, I don't think so in the last election. I don't think there was that.
So what's the fuss?
What's the fuss? It's about the confidence. It's about the confidence that people must have. We as lawyers, we have this very good expression: justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. So elections must not only be fair, they must be seen to be fair. So when I look at these proposals to make, I'm looking at being seen to be fair, which is what is missing and what is causing so much in the country.
But we were talking about the achievements of things that POLAD could have, and you spoke about the issues around election. But for the immediate benefit of the people of Zimbabwe that you represent as political parties, what other things are they that you're going to win for the people?
Within POLAD, certainly, look, with stabilization, we are really working to ensure that the economy somewhat can have predictable issues. But we are actually currently very happy as POLAD with the stability around the currency and the lowering levels of inflation that would, I think with time, we are really confident from what we see that you may not achieve that much under Zanu, but those are the things that we want to achieve. Then we have a component on national healing. I know that there is still a lot which has to be stopped by the government in terms of human rights abuses, unnecessary arrests of opposition people, and so on. But overall, I think that the situation has improved in terms of relations between the organs of state, especially the security arms, and the ordinary people.
Now, if you're just joining us, we are here in studio talking to Professor Lovemore Maduku, who is a member of the Political Actors Dialogue, POLAD. And we're discussing issues around whether POLAD is just a mere talk show or a platform that Zimbabweans need to take seriously. On this program, the Free Talk, proudly brought to you in partnership with Frederick Newman Foundation and Heart and Soul TV and radio. Now, we have been discussing a lot of issues around the constitutional amendment and the issues that POLAD has achieved and intends to achieve. Professor, here you were saying that there has been an improvement. Now, does this improvement entail you standing at court next to Joanna Mamombe and Cecilia Chimbiri? And Cecilia Chimbiri being arrested and you being left out?
Well, I'm not referring to that. Obviously, that is not, it's unacceptable what they have done to Joanna and Cecilia. You are also aware that I turned up at the police. I was with them when they got at the Harare Central to find out why it is that some people are being. And then they told us that they have the prerogative, because not everyone there who was in that was arrested. So, of course, yes, people will know that Professor Maduku was there, wasn't arrested. And then there were a few other young people that were not picked. And then they picked these two. That is to be condemned, this kind of selective issues. So that's part of the thing that is still
So is that an improvement?
Okay, when someone says an improvement, doesn't mean that there are no wrong things. You are here, we are doing it at the university now, I'm a professor here, and we mark. I can actually give a student 13 over 20 and say that you are doing very well. And when we classify them for grades, they get a 2-1, that's a 65%. And that could, sometimes I actually have scripts where the highest mark is 65, and I go out of there and say, look, they did well. But sometimes I do get students that get 85% and so on. So it's a degree. When we say an improvement, we are saying, and it's a very good word, it doesn't, we have not said it's perfect. I've said they have improved. So there has been an improvement, but don't expect perfection. And
Professor Maduku, when you went for demonstrations during the Mugabe era, all the people that you were with at that particular time would be arrested. No, there was no selective application of the law.
Yes, I agree with you. The selective application of the law must be condemned.
And does that show improvement? I mean, honestly, Professor, you're a lawyer, and you can't sit there and say such brazen act and selective application of the law is an improvement.
Well, I've not said that brazen selection of the law or whatever is an improvement. It's the overall picture. The overall picture. There are still very bad portions of this government, extremely bad. Some of the portions, many of them are worse than during the era of Mugabe. But there are areas that are also...
Which ones? Favor us with your wisdom.
I mean, outside the political activists from the opposition who have been picked up, I think the rest of society would simply say that generally there is some peace in the country and some level of respect for the rights of people in other areas.
Which areas?
You cannot compare. Look, you have given the example of the time that we were arrested by Mugabe and so forth. Those times you would be talking about arrests, if not every day, you would be talking about every 3 days. No, the mood and the environment in the country leading up to about 2013, I mean, so 2013 is actually not, about 2010, just a year into the inclusive government, was extremely bad in this country, extremely bad. I don't think you can compare the period then and the period now. The current regime has its excesses. I accept that. They have their excesses. But I believe that they have their own improvements as well.
The last time I spoke to you when we were in Jimba, you spoke about commissioners of ZEC, all of them going. Is that still happening?
I've already said that is something that we feel will not be achieved under the current, because that would have required some amendment to the Constitution. They have rejected that. The only way out of it is to go all the way to 2023 and hope that Zimbabweans would punish Zanu PF for lack of change in that direction.
Do you see that happening?
Yes. I mean, that's why we're in politics. In fact, I think people listening and following your programs must not get this impression that Zanu PF will never be removed from power, that people will not be able to vote Zanu PF out. Our target now must be to raise the consciousness of the Zimbabweans that they elect leaders who would really be the best for the country. That has not been happening because Zanu has kept control of quite a huge portion of our electorate, and we are not doing enough, not lack of resources, disunity in the opposition and so forth. But we are working on that. To 2023 is still about 2 years away from now, and that's a huge scope for us to get to where Zanu will be out of power.
Sitting out here on the vast expanse of the University of Zimbabwe, would you, as a political player, tell me which political party, in your view, is capable of changing the status quo in this country?
That's the NCA. I mean, there's no way, there's no other party which has the capacity to do that.
From being beaten by spoiled ballot, you had lesser votes than the spoiled ballot in the past election.
Yes.
And you think you can rise to that level, that you would beat the ruling party with structures across the vast and length of this country?
Yes, but that was in 2018. That election came, it went. We are looking for a next election. Zimbabweans have learned. Any person who voted for Zanu would realize that that was not a proper vote. And that those who didn't vote for us, many of them are regretting. And I think the purpose of an election year in, year out, I think that some of the voters that gave these majorities to the parties that beat us, some of them are no longer there. I'm sure they are dead. We have new voters that have come up. There will be new voters in 2023. And I think in politics, never. There's no stagnation. In fact, I keep hearing that kind of analysis that says, Maduku got 0 votes here, they got 1 vote there. But as long as I'm permanently in politics, which I am permanently in politics, you should wait for a surprise. And we are working towards that. You also need to realize that history has so much of this. Clearly, I'm sure with the generation that was there in 2018 and those that they will try and resist, try to make our politics like what you have seen, Zanu PF there, their second other party there, and then try to dismiss everyone. Like I'm sure when we started POLAD, who are these people? They just want a feeding and so forth. I think that is not politics. People change every day, they engage every day, they learn every day, and so on. With time, they will know who I am. And one example is every time I get calls now, yeah, we didn't understand you when you were saying let's vote no to the Constitution, and so on and so on. Wait until I get enough time to do this. The ED, I don't know whether he is on his way out. I'm sure when you also talk with him and so on, he's on his way out and so on. But this future belongs to the generation that I am in.
Do you think you're going to beat your client?
Who?
Douglas Togarase Mwonzora.
I'm not even sure whether he's going to be a presidential candidate. I think that we'll talk when we get to after the ballot. After the nomination. If we have the nominations done and you now have the presidential candidates there in 2023.
But he has declared that he's walking to State House in 2023. So he's declared his candidacy already. So
no, we can't take that.
If he gets on the ballot, do you think?
I wouldn't speculate. Let's wait.
But you're saying you can win. Why wouldn't you want to say you'd beat him?
So, then your question is
no, I want you to say it if you believe in it.
No, I think that we've had enough. I heard him saying your words. I would stand by what I've said before, and then anyone can make any implications. Yeah.
As we move on as Zimbabwe, as we move towards 2023, actually, not just towards 2023, but as we move into the future, what is it that you see for this country?
Well, I think as we move in the future, also thank you, Blessed, for that question. This country is going to improve. Life in this country is going to be better. I say so because in the past few, I think in a month now, say 7-8 months, I'm meeting Zimbabweans who now realize where they have been getting it wrong. Zimbabweans have been getting it wrong in not confronting Zanu PF. There's no reason why Zimbabweans must keep giving. 41 years, you have one ruling party. You have the same people in government. Even when we had those running mate clauses, you had people talking about, no, this is against Chiwenga and so on. So you still have the liberation people being part of the governance of the country. I think that is out. And we have so many Zimbabweans who are realizing that. Their headache now is to see who is it that will take over from ZANU. But surely ZANU PF must no longer be allowed to be in government in 2023. Because of that, I'm confident that this country will move forward. Get an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old, they must now be exposed to other ideas. We've had your program now, I'm not sure for how long you have been on this. That will be the first time that Zimbabweans or whoever will follow your program would have listened to me for this. That would not have been possible if we didn't have alternative media. So look at the future of this country with hope, and that hope will come. All you need are Zimbabweans that are able to focus on. Zimbabweans must remove themselves from the ZANU PF mentality, remove themselves from some of the opposition people who think that life is about you are ZANU PF, you are not ZANU PF. I'm better opponent of ZANU PF and so on. Like the question you wanted to pose at some point there, do you believe, whom do you think would be better than the NCA? That kind of thing is, you would already have removed the NCA and you think that there are other players out there. There is a lot of hope. I am lucky that I'm in a university here. We have lots of students in this university, and when you meet them, every time we meet the first years, I quite inspired by the kind of thinking. Only that Zimbabweans do not know what is best. So your media and other media must focus on what is the way forward. Now, I think there are others who will be surprised that I was criticizing Zanu PF, because they would have been fed by someone who says, if you are in POLAD, you are Zanu PF. No, we have a different understanding that we can continue to engage the devil if we know that the devil will be with us and so forth. I remember that there used to be a time, I think you have not been that, there was a time you were arrested briefly, I think, by whether a roadblock or something. I think you'd have felt better if you had been taken in for about 2 days and you are in a prison. They call it the prisoner's dilemma. You are in prison, you know that this prison official, he is the person who will be responsible for taking you to that room, ensuring that you have some water and so on. For that period, you'll have to work with that. You negotiate with that prison officer. As you wait for your day, you know you'll be released after 4 or 5 days. You have to work. Now with Zanu, we will be released in 2023. But before 2023, we are like the prisoners that you get there. They are told that amnesty, you are coming, you are leaving this prison on 31 December, a particular year. You are serving your term of imprisonment. During that period, you have to engage with the prison guards and the prison officials. That's how I would put it.
So just before we close this program, we're going to take a listen to some of the voices of the people who on the street that we have spoken to, and what they think about POLAD and the constitutional amendments. So these are their voices. And here on Free Talk with our partners, Frederick Newman Foundation, we believe that dialogue and allowing people to have free speech is the center of development in any democracy. So this is why we allow those who wear the shoe to speak.
Do you have faith in POLAD?
Certainly not.
Why?
Because you see, most of those participants, I think they're just wasting the president's time. Those are people looking for economic benefits from participating in POLAD. If we remove dollars from that process, you will see some of them falling away, I think. I also think that some of those participants are just looking for political capital by being present before cameras and getting media coverages. Otherwise, I don't believe that deep down in their hearts they are dedicated to extricate Zimbabwe from the challenges we are having at the moment. So I think those most of those participants are just wasting the president's time.
Are you happy over the constitutional amendment?
At the moment, I can't say I am or I'm not, because the amendments, they're a mixed bag. For example, there are clauses which are appreciated by many people. For example, reservations of parliamentary seats for I think up to 35 years or below. I'm not too sure. I haven't gone through those amendments. So then I've also heard people complaining about other things, but at the moment I can't really say myself I'm happy or I'm not.
In Poland, in fact, I have to know the concept tizive kuti zvakamira sei in Poland. But I have got faith in Poland, yes, of course. According ne zvatinenge tanzwawo kuti ndo zviripo zvinoda kuti zviitwe ndo zvinoita kuti tizova nefaith. Likewise, zvamunenge muchitsanangurawo maererano nekubatanawo kwevanhu kweconstitution iripo inoitawo kuti vanhu vave nekuenderera mberi. Mukubatana kunounza kuwirirana kwevanhu, kuvakikawo kwenyika nekudzidzisana zvakanaka. I think ndo zvinozoita kuti tive tichisupporta that Poland.
Okay, are you happy over constitutional amendment?
Ipapo panoti tikahadzikewo futi tingeida kuzivawo kuti nemhaka iyeyi zvichizenge zvichida kunzi zviwedzerwe. Of course tikazowana mareasons ekuti zviri kuwedzerwa tinge taakuzivawo kuti zvakamira sei. Because I think inyaya yekuti makore awedzerwa kuvatongi handiti zvakanakirawo kuti tikadzidzawo kuti zvakaitirwei ende zvinenge zvichifambawo zvakaita sei ndo zvinoita kuti tinge tichisapota kana kuti tisasapote because chatinongoda chete kunge tine constitution inoendesa zvinhu kumberi. I think so.
Izvi zvinongoenderana nekuti zvinhu zvacho zvinenge zvaitawo zvakanaka, zvikaitawo zvakanaka zvinenge zvakanaka, asi zvikaita zviri zvekuti vanhu vatsotswewo vamwe zvinenge zvisina kunyatsonaka. Asi zvikaitwa mune zvakanaka, mapolitical parties acho akabatana nayo Zanu PF yacho zvikafamba zvakanaka, hapana dambudziko. Asi pamwe kana vachida kunyangira vamwe kuti vazonyudzana nevamwe zvinenge zvisina kunaka. Ndofunga ndiwo mashoko andogona kutaura pamusoro pePOLAD.
Muri kufara here neconstitutional amendment?
Constitutional amendment isina tinamboinzwa isu. Hamene kuti pamwe vakangoitaurirawo ikoko kwavanotaurira nani vamwe isati satainzwa. Asi pamwe dei tikainzwawo dei tichitaura kuti tinofara nazvo kana kuti hatifari.
The POLAD, in actual fact, that's my personal view. I don't have faith in it, in the reason why the way it was done. You know, we had the election, the 2018 general election. After we have done, you know what happened. We went to the court, the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court declared His Excellency the President Mnangagwa the winner. Fine, it's okay. But after that, the president tried to soften up the hostility which was in the country. You know, we are in a political polarity in Zimbabwe, whereby the loser Nelson Chamisa didn't accept or recognize President Mnangagwa as the legitimate winner. Nelson Chamisa is the one who first called for dialogue between himself and President Mnangagwa. Instead of having the dialogue, the two losers, we end up having some of the lesser losers being involved or being called at the table. So in that, I don't see the light of the POLAD thing. It is supposed to be a dialogue between Chamisa and E.D. Mnangagwa. That's my view. That's my view. Thank you.
Are you happy with the constitutional amendment?
The constitutional amendment, you know, there's a lot of debate ringing on in the country. Recently, today, Professor Maduku, he actually attacked the Constitution number 2. Is actually saying we are trying to consolidate power in one person, who is actually the president. In other words, he was trying to say we are creating a dictatorship. So in my view, again, I don't support the amendment. Why can we keep on amending the Constitution? We are supposed to go back to the people. The people are the custodian of the law. So we are supposed to go back to the people. Remember when we go to, when this Constitution was actually signed into law, they first went to the people, the people spoke. If the people spoke, then you want to amend it, you should go back to the people who are the original, the custodian of the law. So what they are doing, to me, it doesn't make any sense.
So, Professor, there was a point when I was talking to Professor Walshman, and he said that they don't believe in POLAD because they believe that you don't have a base, a social base that you represent, because the elections showed that you did not represent anyone.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a wrong view. That's a very wrong view. It's the social base. Elections just come and they come and go. We had elections in 2018, so you got the votes that came. But there's something about an election, which is to show you that there are Zimbabweans out there that are committed to involvement in political frameworks. Mm-hmm. So when a person becomes a presidential candidate, they put themselves across as a candidate in an election. They are a very important portion of your society because the democratic processes act on voluntarism. So imagine you can call for an election and don't get someone turning up to participate. We used to have a situation where Zanu used to win, they call them uncontested votes. I know that. So out of, at that time it was 120. There was one election where Zanu actually won about 52 or 51 seats uncontested. So then when you then get people getting interested in contesting elections, you engage or whatever, put a lot of effort in denigrating them, humiliating them and so on. It's a misunderstanding of a democratic tradition. You actually have to have these people, what they get, that's all. So he is not correct there. There is a social base. The social base is the very idea that these are people that have contested an election, and we are building a culture of contesting elections.
But do you feel adequate sitting in POLAD and knowing that you didn't even have close to 1% of that vote?
Oh, well, I very much feel confident because I am in POLAD not to govern. We are in POLAD to give ideas. So that percentage of votes, so you get 3,000 votes or less than 3,000 people that and so on. You have been a process, you are involved in a process where you are making society work, society tick. Society is ticking because imagine that people were observing and they were following elections, listening to results, wanting to say, okay, so what did Maduku get there? Okay, got 0. That builds a nation. That is very critical to the building. 5 years down the line, what we did in 2018 was a building block to a particular type of democracy. 10 years down the line, they will be coming to say, thank you for the efforts that you have done in the country. Thank you for what you've done. That's what happened. So the first, they say a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. I think that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we have started a journey, and that I have no illusions about it. Look, I can't say that the person who would have got 2 million votes and they are not in government, and the person who gets 500 votes and are not in government, they're not any different, because the purpose of the election was to elect one of us. So you can be a very big loser, if we put that expression, and this one is a very small loser. What is that? That difference is we are all players. That's how you choose to describe yourself after an election.
So,
and then you say,
so you're Manchester United and Arsenal, even
correct.
all played 90 minutes,
Correct.
even though if you lose 15-0,
correct. Yeah, you need that.
you've lost.
Yeah. So even that's right. Even the part I don't even understand the logic of those who say no, so and so got so many votes. So what is that for? It is one person who gets to the office. The rest are out. And then, of course, you got so many votes, I think might help you in the future. Just like we got so many votes, it might really mean that we have to work extra hard if we have to. That's what it means.
Mm-hmm. But this is, in conclusion, as you look to the people of Zimbabwe, what is it that you'd want to, them to hold on to? The parting shots, and is there a promise to the future? Is there something that really you would want to send from your heart?
From my heart,
yeah.
Zimbabweans must know that Zimbabwe belongs to them. And that for every issue in this country, we must never give it up and say, well, let's hear what ED has to say, let's hear what these politicians say, you are coming in and so on. We must have a spirit of getting things to say, these are our things. Particularly the example I've given of a constitution being theirs. The current one is not their constitution. Mm-hmm. That I want to make it a parting shot. The current constitution is not a people's constitution, and our primary agenda as Zimbabweans must really build our constitution, which we will not tamper with once we do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, thank you very much, Professor Maduku, for joining us on the Free Talk, where we were discussing amazing issues around POLAD, the constitutional amendment, and way to Zimbabwe. Our partners, Frederick Newman Foundation, Heart and Soul TV and Radio, we believe that for creating a platform where Zimbabweans can talk to each other and not through each other, where ideas can bounce off, and we can become a family of nations again and get the place that we, as Zimbabweans, can chart our own future and be able to be better people. This was the Free Talk in partnership with Frederick Newman Foundation and Heart and Soul TV and Radio. And I'm your host, Dara Blessed Mhlanga, having had the honor to be interviewing Professor Lovemo Maduku here at the amazing University of Zimbabwe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Please keep supporting us. Follow us on our YouTube channel, HStvZim, our Facebook page, Heart and Soul Zim, and on our Twitter page, HSTV news. We give you the best. We are the best. This is Free Talk in partnership with Frederick Newman Foundation, our partners in free speech. Free speech is the center of development of any nation.